Hello and welcome to our event. We appreciate that you're either here in person or with us online. This is part of our Funds and Focus series. We've been doing these since July of 2024, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the public on them. As of noon today, we had 44 registrants online for the online event, probably because of today's weather. So for those of you who are joining us both online and those who have braved the wind to be with us in person, we really appreciate that you're here. You had a lot of options for what you could be doing tonight and how you could be spending your time. The fact that you came or you're attending online to learn about, our budget and parks and recreation and how all of that works is valuable to the city, and we really do appreciate that. We hope that by the end of the event that you feel like it was a good use of your time. So I am going to go ahead and introduce those who are participating today for this Funds and Focus event. We have myself, I'm Communication and Engagement Manager Kimberly Overholt. I help MC these events. You'll see me at a lot of the community summer farmers markets, and I just enjoy talking to you guys. So, and organizing some of these events with the team, and so thank you. And then we have with us digital media specialist, Logan Garcia. He's moderating for us online, and this is his last meeting with us, and he's been the key to our success with our online moderation, and we really appreciate everything he's done for us while he's been here. He will help with the online guests question and answer portion, so he's going to help communicate to us if you've got any questions and answers when you're joining us online. We also have Clara Schultz. She's videotaping this tonight. We will have this posted to our website by noon on Friday so that you can share it with your friends if you want. No pressure there. But we try and make it as accessible as possible, so we'll play it on our television station. We'll post it to YouTube. It goes on lovegov.org, our main landing page. We put it on our letstalkloveland.org/budget webpage, and it will be available on our video on demand. If you're unfamiliar with that, that's lovegov.org/TV. We also have with us Brian Maldiz, our Chief Financial Officer. He has been the face of a lot of these of every presentation, and he is our subject matter expert on the city's budget. We also have our Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Molly, in the audience today, and she's also very helpful with all of this information gathering and helping us create these presentations. Because this is Parks and Rec focused, we have our Parks and Rec Director, Kara Kish, and she's the reason that a lot of you guys have come to hear about the budget, ask questions about the budget, and learn. And again, we're very appreciative, not just to staff, but to you that are joining us. We also have in the audience our Director of Communication and Engagement, Nicole Yost. And as a reminder, the event's going to go until 6:30. So we have a short presentation for you, and then we do questions and answers. And the other thing is, for those of you who are online, there's a link that we've dropped for you that is some frequently asked questions from previous Funds and Focus or throughout the summer that we had collected when we had people emailing us that we thought would be of interest to you. So you can click that link and see it. And for those of you in person, we had that out on the table. And so hopefully you were able to grab that as you came in. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to go over some goals, some ground rules, which is like, how we do these events. We're going to talk a little bit about our budget, give an overview for those of you who have attended these before. This is going to be a repeat of some of the information that you've gotten before, but it should be a quick repeat. If you were interested in any flyers about our general budget education, those are online at letstalkloveland.org/budget. For those of you in person, those were on the table outside as well. Then we'll go over our parks and recreation funding sources. We will talk a little bit about the city's strategy, the methodology that we used when determining how we were going to balance our budget. And then Kara's going to talk again about the strategies used in 2024, 2025, and 2026. Then we'll open it up for the Q&A, and hopefully we'll get to everybody's questions and answers. If we're seeing a lot of repetitive questions, we might combine those. If we hit 6:30 and we haven't answered all of them, please make sure that we have your email address so that we can get those answers to you. But we certainly want to address the questions and answers because you're spending your time with us. So that's a layout of how this will go for those of you who are in person with questions and answers. As you're listening to the presentation, if you have a question pop up, put it down on your piece of paper. We will collect those for the question and answer session. We have also had people take additional sheets of paper to ask additional questions. That's 100% okay. For those of you who are joining us online, you'll just drop those in the questions and answers feature and on the Zoom call. So thank you. We'll go to the next one. It is on. Yeah, it's just not working. That's all right. All right, so the goal with these is the transparent communication. For those of you who have been to one of our many web pages, and on the frequently asked question that we did today, we put a list of all of the URLs that we've used to really try and just help provide as much transparent communication as possible. The frequently asked question PDF, there are 5 links to different sections of information that you might be curious about, and we just want to make sure that the information is distributed in a clear way and available to you. And that's really one of our goals with this. And with this, hopefully, you'll walk away knowing something that maybe you didn't know before, and that's super important to you and to us. So what we want to do is we want to create a safe space to learn. That's why we do the presentations first. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please hold them or write them down until the end. And then, we will go ahead and do that Q&A together. We've got a lot probably with the online audience, and so we may even start with our online questions tonight. Usually we do in person first. So now I'm going to hand it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Waldies.
Thank you, Kim. So yes, I'm Chief Financial Officer for Loveland, Brian Waldies. I know we're all here to discuss Parks and Recreation, but I'm going to take just a few minutes to try and set the city's strategic budget position for you. Maybe some of you have seen some of these slides or this presentation in a lot of the road shows we've done, but we feel it's really important to just take a few moments at the beginning of the presentation to explain the environment that Parks and Rec and so many other of our departments are operating in currently. So the first thing we like to point out is for more than 70 years, the City of Loveland has been a full-service city. So what does that mean? It means we don't only provide the things that traditionally come from governments, right, like transportation and life safety, police, fire, and roads, but we also provide a lot of the fabric and the personality of our city, Parks and Rec Department, right? Our great Rialto Theater, the Pulliam building that just came online, our library. We do a lot of other things for our community as well. So it's not just those basic government functions that you would expect, but also a lot of the things that inform the personality, the fabric of our community. Why is this important? It's important because as we go to the next slide, please, Logan. You'll see we do a lot of other things at the city as well. And what you're looking at here on this slide is our unassigned fund balance for all of our different funds across the entire city and our general fund as well. So what you see is our other funds total over $226 million in unassigned fund balance. In other words, roughly approximates money in the bank. And if you look at our general fund, it's really only a little less than $22 million in terms of fund balance. The reason we put this slide up here is so people understand our general fund, where Parks and Rec, public safety, a lot of our transportation services exist, is actually a relatively small portion of what the city does. The vast majority of what we do is in those red circles, and it's things like our utilities, okay, water, power, our great Pulse internet service, amongst other utility type funds that operate more like a business. And that is the vast majority of what we do. Those funds and those programs are funded by fees, not by taxes. The general fund is funded primarily by taxes. So that's why there's a difference there. And that's a very well thought out setup. In other words, you don't want your water utility, for example, being subject to the whims of the economy or politics or anything of that nature. So it makes a lot of sense. The vast majority of what we do is funded by their fee schedules and operating well. The issue we have is when we get to our general fund. So you can see out of this total of over $246 million of funds, only 20 million, or about 22 million, is the general fund, and of that 22 million, a full 20.6 million is reserves. Some of those reserves are required, like our Tabor reserve and a few debt reserves. We also have a large contingency reserve. I shouldn't say large. It represents 3 months of funding. 2 months of funding for our general fund in case of emergencies. And that is a best practice throughout Colorado and most of your municipalities throughout the country. Maintain that kind of reserve. And the good news is we have not had to touch that reserve. That reserve is fully funded, and it is in place. The last time we had to access it was in 2013 for the flood, and we used almost all of it for that flood. So it is a very important asset to have as a community. So that's the good news. The more challenging news is that only leaves $1.3 million in unassigned fund balance in our general fund. And $1.3 million is a lot of money, but when you consider our general fund is over $130 million every year, that's really a razor-thin margin to have for funds that can be used in case of unexpected expenses. So it's important that we set the context there. On our next slide, what we're going to show is, the condition of our general fund, as I'm sure you've all heard. We've had a lot of challenges in the general fund, but they're not new. If you look back at the history of our general fund, really starting in 2016, we had issues with funding levels. You see us kind of going into the red, chewing into our fund balances, starting way back in 2016, then in 2019 and in 2020. Our councils put a couple of sales tax ballot referrals on the ballot, which both failed. And then what we had was we had COVID come along. Now, COVID, of course, was a very serious event and in no way a good thing. But for the city, it meant we made a lot of budget cuts of the temporary sort, and we also received a lot of federal money in terms of ARPA and CARES grants. We also had the Amazon facility built here in our city. So those non-recurring one-time revenues created those green years, which look like great years, but they were really being funded by non-recurring revenues that went away. So after that, and that money had been used for construction projects, a few of our capital improvement projects, also some of it for operations. After 2022, you can see we kind of go back to that condition we were in beforehand, which was also compounded by the removal of sales tax on food for home consumption. So we find our general fund in a challenging position. If we go to the next slide, please. So just very quickly to show, okay, where does this challenging position come from? Well, like we talked about, Loveland is a full-service city. We provide, now there's exceptions to everything, right? But we provide pretty much every other service that you will find up and down the Front Range, and we do it for a lower cost than any other city on the Front Range. And that's what this slide is showing. These circles are to scale, and they represent sales tax in Loveland at 3%, kind of right there with the big red arrow. And then you'll see they're proportional throughout the rest of our friends here on the Northern Front Range. Pretty much everyone else has a higher sales tax rate. And when you consider the fact we're the only city in the area that has no sales tax on food for home consumption, it makes us the town with the lowest sales tax rate of any of those communities. And again, it's a sales tax rate that was put in place in 1984 and has not been increased since. But we offer a lot of additional services over that time, right? We do things like the Pulliam building and expand other services. So we're in a challenging spot from a sales tax perspective, which is our most important revenue stream. On our next slide, let's take a quick look at property tax, which is our second biggest revenue stream in the general fund. Kind of the same situation, put in place in 1992. These circles are to scale. We are ahead of a couple of other towns in terms of our mill levy, but still one of the smaller mill levies in the region. And when we combine these factors on the next slide, please, Logan, you will see that if we kind of go through a hypothetical, these are hypothetical numbers, okay? This doesn't represent what actual spends are. It in no way feeds into the revenue that we actually receive in the general fund. It's a hypothetical example of someone who has a $425,000 assessed value house, spends $13 at retail, okay, walking around kind of spending, and then $4,600 in the grocery store. when you look at the revenue that is derived from those activities, Loveland comes out last by a lot. It's a very important strategic data point to have in your mind. When we talk about these challenges, we have lots of things to talk about in Loveland in terms of programming and revenue sources and partnerships, but the number one factor that is causing us to have these conversations is our tax rates. So everything else comes a distant second place after these factors. And as you look at this chart, something else that's important to note, you see we kind of have the fire logo there. We have fire services with our friends at the LFRA included in that tax amount. Some of these other cities actually have fire districts that have a separate mill levy, so fire services aren't even included in those numbers. So Loveland has been providing this full service level of programming for this period of time at the very lowest price that you could possibly be paying in this area. But we are hitting challenges now where we can't keep it up because we haven't changed anything since 1984 or 1992 in terms of property tax, and in fact, we just took a pretty big step backwards. So that's why we're having these important conversations. And with that, I will stop boring you and get to the more fun department, which is Parks and Rec. So I'm happy to answer I'll be happy to answer any questions about that at the end of the presentation. But with that, I think that's my last slide. Is it, Logan? Let's find out. Let's go to the next one.
There we go.
Okay, so you're
That is a delight to follow. Hi, everybody. My name is Kara Kish. I serve as your Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Loveland. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to speak about the funding sources that support Parks and Recreation in Loveland. And thank you to Finance, thank you to Communications and Engagement for giving us this platform. We are going to be hitting this at a very high level, everybody. If I don't address something this evening, we don't get it into the question and answer, I am available to you and to every single person in this community. My contact information is online. If you're here, there are cards here for me, but I am happy to talk to anybody at any time about the work and the services that we provide in Parks and Recreation. So tonight we're going to cover 7 funding sources. That is how many different places serve the Parks and Recreation Department. We'll cover what they are, where the resources come from, what we're allowed to use those resources for, and what we choose to use those resources for. Next slide, please. So we will start with the thing that was really just focused on and has been a topic of conversation in this community for quite a while, and that is the contribution of the general fund to the provision of Parks and Recreation services. As Brian mentioned, this is coming primarily from your sales tax bases, and we get a portion of that. We do many things with this. Primarily, this serves our Parks Division, our Recreation Division, our Administration Division, and our Planning Division. But what we do is this is the fund that supports staffing for all of those individuals that work for us. So that is our full-time staff, our part-time staff, our seasonal staff, our contracted staff, comes from this fund. In addition to that, which as you all know, staffing is a huge part of your budget, we support operations and programs with that. So all of the things that our team needs to be successful in their job, to perform their job, whether or not it's trucks or paper or good steel-toed shoes to do their job safely. We support that. And then we also support the provision of community programs. We actually offer thousands of unique community recreational programs for our community. And so all of that gets supported through that program contribution as well. We focus on capital replacement. So when a asset in our division or in our department reaches the end of its usable life, we have to evaluate whether or not that is a resource that we are going to be able to replace. That is fully funded through the general fund. And then I wanted to mention cost recovery. That's not something that we spend the general fund. That is an obligation that the Parks and Recreation Department has to the City of Loveland, has to the general fund. The City Council has previously determined that a cost recovery for our Recreation Division would be set at 65%. So every dollar that we receive from the general fund in our recreation division, we are responsible for generating at least 65 cents to that every year that goes back into the general fund. One more comment on general fund. So this is the only fund that we have where we allocate it for the purposes of getting to a fund balance of zero. Now, the general fund isn't at a balance of zero every year, but the allocation that comes to Parks and Recreation, we utilize every penny in order to provide the staffing resources and the services to our community to try and get that cash balance for Parks and Recreation down to $0 at the end of every calendar year. So I'll be ready to go. The Parks and Recreation Department has many special revenue funds. These are funds that are going to have rules to them. They're dedicated for specific use, often through state legislation, local ordinance, county ordinance, but everything has rules about how we can spend it, has very defined ways that we can expend those resources. So I'll take a moment and go through each of those very quickly. So our Conservation Trust Fund are dollars that we receive as the City of Loveland from Colorado Lottery. So every time somebody purchases a ticket to play the lottery, the parks specifically the open lands and trails divisions in the entirety of Colorado, those dollars are allocated towards the acquisition and maintenance and operations of our open spaces and trails. So we get that from the state of Colorado. We're allocated a certain percentage based on whatever resources they bring in that year. Our open space sales tax, we receive a portion of the Larimer County open space sales tax. So this was elected by the residents of Larimer County to assess a tax for the purposes of supporting open spaces, trail development, everything that we can to support our open spaces. And again, we receive an allocation that is determined based on our population. We receive that annually. Our Perpetual Care Fund is actually a fund that we do not utilize at this time. We are putting money into it. So every time we have sales for our cemeteries, whether or not it's Lakeside or it is Loveland Burial Park, when we're selling a plot, when we're selling a niche, when we're selling spaces in our ossuaries now, portions of that are going into the Perpetual Care Fund. And that will be the funding resource that we get to use as a city in order to manage the cemeteries in perpetuity. There will come a point where we are no longer generating revenue from the sale of spaces in our cemeteries, and that will be utilized to maintain the cemeteries in perpetuity. Our Park Improvement Fund the resources from that come from a couple different places. Primarily, they come from shelter rentals in our system. They come from special fees that are assessed for special events. But those resources are utilized for a handful of things. We can utilize it for things such as replacing our shelters. We can utilize it for improvements to sorry. Sure. Whatever the need is, we can focus some of those dollars towards capital projects. We really utilize those funds as a one-time resource and identify them based on the state of our assets. And capital expansion is a very special revenue fund that we have, and I have that on an additional slide there. So this is something special to Loveland. I know a lot of communities in Colorado collect these, but it is not particularly commonplace across the country. Collection of expansion fees, or sometimes referred to as impact fees, on development is a very special resource that we have available to us. The intention of collecting these fees is to keep up with new growth and development. We would love for the residents of today who experience a certain level of service within our community, that same level of service continues to new residents. So as we build out, we need to contemplate where and when new parks should be added. We need to contemplate where and when new facilities need to be added. We look towards our master plan for that. We look towards the city's strategic plan to determine how we utilize those dollars. We collect 4 separate capital expansion fees for Parks and Recreation, and they're spelled out there. We collect fees for parks, we collect fees for recreation, we collect fees for open lands, and we collect fees for trail. One of the things I wanted to say about the special revenue funds, all the ones that we just discussed, as well as the capital expansion fees, is that the fund balance does not go down to zero every year. So as I said, it's very important in our allocation from the general fund that we plan for the dollars we need and we spend for the dollars we need. We actually have some opportunities within our special revenues to contemplate what dollars are needed. Maybe we need to save our resources for a couple of years in order to afford the asset that we need to put in there. We budget out, we look out 10 years at a time. We do budget annually, so we anticipate the dollars that we are going to spend. We spend those, but the grand total of each of those funds does not go to zero every year, and we're able to really plan out for 10 years, looking at what we should do next for our community. Thank you. These are not funding sources in terms of the city's funding opportunities, but I wanted to highlight just to the extent that the Parks and Recreation Department utilizes grants, partnerships, sponsors, and donors. I have shown there in some logos only a fraction of the partners that we collaborate with. These help support one-time capital projects, sponsorships, or serve as program support. These are not utilized to support ongoing operations. We really intend to utilize them in places where we're looking at one-time contributions. So I just want to highlight our Loveland Parks and Recreation Foundation. They are designed to gather fundraising resources, and they are primarily focused on sponsorships for youth to participate in our community programs. We have federal and state partners in the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Those federal partnerships extend to transportation, things for multimodal pathways, as well as carbon reduction. We have a great partner in Colorado in Great Outdoors. We partner with our local agencies and go after incredible open spaces and development of those so our community can participate in all of the open lands. And then also wanted to call out the Thompson School District. We participate with them in almost like a facility swap. So we utilize their facilities, their gym spaces, in order for our youth programs to have practices, in order for adult athletics to have some spaces, and in exchange, they have some access to our facilities as well. Many of the ball fields that they use or fields that they use are owned by the City of Loveland, and so we have a partnership in order to give them access to those spaces. I think, and our enterprise fund. We only have one enterprise fund in Parks and Recreation, and that is to support our golfing operations. As has been described in different places, the enterprise funds are really dedicated for one sole purpose. The revenues come from the fees generated from that service, and that service has to generate enough revenue in order to cover their operational expenses, as well as any capital improvements or capital replacements that they need to handle. So our golf enterprise is very successful at that, and very proud to have that as a part of our services in Parks and Recreation.
What do we always say? No sales tax dollars for golf.
None.
It is a business that runs on its own fees.
Yeah. Thank you, Logan.
So this slide, I get all the kind of the heavy hitter slides. You get all the fun ones. This slide kind of speaks to the philosophy behind the exercise we had to go through when we had that revenue reduction as a result of ballot 300 passing, which removed sales tax on food. That impacted our general fund over $10 million a year starting in 2024, and obviously will be perpetual, right? That'll be every year. So we had to look at our services and go through a difficult exercise that was made more difficult by the fact that this was a permanent change. Earlier in the presentation, we talked a little bit about the budget cuts we made for COVID. Again, COVID was no good, but those cuts were easier in nature to make because they were temporary. You can do things when you're facing a temporary revenue reduction, like let's not give any raises for a couple of years, let's hold vacancies open, no training for a year or two, things of that nature. Well, you can't do that if your model is permanent, if your reduction is permanent, and that's what we have here. So this was kind of our pyramid showing, kind of the hierarchy of needs of our community, understanding the changes we make are going to have to be permanent. So we looked at these three different categories. The bottom of your pyramid, that's supposed to represent kind of your foundational services, also the services that serve and impact the most citizens. So in that category, you had public safety, police and fire. You also had transportation, roads. So that bottom section of the pyramid was not entirely protected, okay? Our friends at the LFRA and the LPD gave back over $1 million between the two of them in terms of reductions, and so did our transit program. So they were allocated some of that $10 million that we had to reduce every year, but they received a smaller portion of it, or a proportionally smaller allocation. In the middle, you had your critical government functions, things like our internal functions, our attorneys, finance, human resources, things of that nature, things that, okay, those can also be allocated some of the reductions, but they're relatively small dollar departments compared to the category 1 there. And they also are essential. In other words, to function as an organization of our size, we have 1,000 employees, we need a functional HR department. So that level 2 there of the pyramid also received reductions, but neither 1 nor 2 received the proportion that 3 did. Okay, and 3 is the top of the pyramid. Those are the services such as parks and recreation, a lot of stuff from our arts and culture, and then also our library programming, which, again, are essential services to a lot of people. Okay, we understand that. Those are services that mean a lot to what Loveland is and to our citizens. This was not an easy calculus, and it was not done lightly, and it was not done because we wanted to cut from these categories for any reason. We don't want to have to go through any of this. But when we had to do this math, we had to protect life and limb, transportation. We had to be able to protect our ability to function as an organization. And unfortunately, where we had to land was, okay, these services that we all love, but serve a relatively low number of people and are not critical to life and limb, but still nothing that we did lightly. So when we talk about our reductions, this was the philosophy we took. And of course, that resulted in uneven distribution of the reductions. Okay, it just is what it is. Parks and Rec received $3 million, even though Parks and Rec has a smaller budget than PD, for example. And PD received a lower allocation. Why? Because that was a result of the prioritization staff worked through with council that we were going to prioritize public safety and not give as large an allocation to those programs. So again, not a process that was any fun, but it was successful in the sense that our results in 2024 were that of a normal general fund, albeit with reduced service levels from where we were. We didn't have to cut into that emergency fund balance, as I alluded to earlier, and we were able to sustain our service levels throughout the year. But something that people need to realize is we're stable, and we like to use that analogy because it's almost like if you went to the hospital to see your friend, and it was maybe in some kind of incident, and said, how are they? And they said, well, they're stable. It's okay, well, that's good. It means, right, they're not going down, but it's not necessarily what you want to hear. It's very analogous to what we have now. Our general fund is stable, but we are shorting our capital improvement program, things like roads, roofs on our buildings, sidewalks, things of that nature. We are not funding those programs adequately. So while we are stable, while this process worked and prevented us from going into an emergency situation, it's not where anybody wants to be, and we can't stay here forever. At some point, that deferred maintenance is going to come home to roost, and it's going to be a lot more expensive than it would have otherwise been to either maintain the asset or replace it sooner. So, again, yeah, that is the service reduction methodology.
And now I'd like to walk you through how the Parks and Recreation Department approached meeting that requirement, meeting that request from city management to reduce $3 million from the Parks and Recreation General Fund allocation. This strategy that we will go over only applies to the general fund. So all of the funds I just got done telling you about, this conversation only applies to our general fund where we needed to make the reduction. That $3 million represented about 30% of our budget. Generally had about a $10 million allocation down to 7. And that took effect in 2025, but our reductions actually began in 2024. Most of the publicity and the public knowledge about our reductions started in 2025 with the service level reductions. But in 2024, the Parks and Recreation Department contributed $1.8 million in a return of funding back into the general fund in order to meet the reduction needs for that year, as it was the first year that we were impacted by the lesser of the sales tax collection. So in 2024, we focused on the things that would not have service level impacts or would not have immediate service level impacts. And we focused on our capital replacements. As I shared with you earlier, all capital replacements are funded through the general fund in our parks and our recreation facilities. So we were able to give those back. We gave back $500,000 associated with tennis court replacements at North Lake Park. That project did not get done because we returned those dollars to the general fund. We gave back over $700,000 for an ADA project at Centennial Park. Those resources were given back in 2024, and the project was not able to move forward at that time. And then to get to that 1.8, we also saw some capital replacement at Chilson that we didn't produce. There were about 30 different things that got us to that 1.8, but those are the primary categories. Those are in effect service level losses for our community. They may not have been seen or felt in that moment, but they still represented service level loss. But 2025 is where we really needed to make the most consequential decisions that we can make as Parks and Recreation professionals, as public servants. And that is determining how you cut 30% from your budget and try to minimize the service level impacts to your community. One of the top strategies that we employed was the prioritization of essential park maintenance ahead of capital replacement investment. So what are our essential park maintenance? So that is, let me take one step back. Of the divisions that the general fund supports, our parks division is the most subsidized because you're talking about infrastructure. You're talking about critical and vital infrastructure to our communities. This is land owned by the city that must be maintained, that must be irrigated, that must be weed control, or must have weed control, must be mowed, must be cleaned, and be safe for our community to experience. So we had to meet those base responsibilities. So that was the elevation of essential park maintenance ahead of capital infrastructure. I'll get to the capital in a little bit. So we also knew that we were going to need to reduce our staff. In 2024, we started holding vacancies, but in 2025, by the end of the year is when we needed to vacate the positions that we needed to reduce. As you know, whether or not it's your personal budget or other budgets that you manage, your staffing resources are some of the largest resources that you have, as well as the stuff, the things that you need to buy. We reduced our staff by 10%. So we went from approximately 100 employees to just over 90. Those are the people who provide the service levels. So that was an equivalent, about a 10 FTE equivalent. So that included full-time staff, that included seasonal staff, that included part-time staff. Those are the individuals who provide the service levels to your community, which ultimately led to the service level impacts that we have been very apparent to our community, and the service level impacts that still haven't come to fruition today. But given the fact that we have prioritized essential park maintenance ahead of capital replacements, The dollars, the robust dollars that we had in our general fund prior to the reduction have effectively been zeroed out. So the dollars that we always had to replace a playground, the dollars that we always had to replace a tennis court, the dollars to repave a parking lot are no longer a part of the Parks and Recreation budget. Going into 2026, we really wanted to focus on the service levels that we were able to reinstate for our community. As I said, the staffing resources, the amount of services that our community receives directly from our staffing was one of the ways that we could restore a vast amount of service levels. So the stability of our Parks Division staffing was critical. When we reduced in 2025, we went too far. It was not stable. It was a pen and paper exercise. And when we started to live it, we had intentionally sort of set a 2 months into our season to reevaluate, and we had to make adjustments at that point. So the stability of our Parks Division, we are adding back a full-time staff member. We are reclassifying and restructuring our Parks Division, as well as adding back a seasonal crew who will focus on restroom operations to get our restrooms open. They will be open for the park season, and we now have the team to help provide that service. Also, the 4th of July celebration was reinstated. And so I look forward to every year from now on, I will be able to take recommendations to the city manager. City manager will be able to take recommendations to the council to continue to restore services as the allocation of budget allows. That being said, we still will be in a deficit. One of the things that the city has been saying, Brian, you've been saying, is that we balanced our budget on the back of capital. And that is absolutely correct for your Parks and Recreation Department as well, and will have long-term impacts to the service levels. So with that, I don't have anything else to offer.
Yeah, and with that, we're going to go ahead and move to our question and answer portion. So for those of you who are in person, if you could write down your questions on the piece of paper that we gave you. Is there anybody in person who doesn't have one of these papers that would like to ask a question? If you raise your hand, I'll stop by. Those of you who are joining us online, if you can drop your questions in the chat, we'd really appreciate that. We are going to start with anybody who has an online question tonight. And while we're waiting for folks to, if you've got a question in the room, just raise your hand and we'll come grab it. And while we're waiting for those questions, I think it's important to also note, Kara, today we were talking about the dollars in grant funding, the one-time money that you guys procured in 2024. And I think it was $7.4 million in one-time grant funding that the Parks and Recreation Department was able to use. And so they do seek sources when those sources are available, but those aren't necessarily reliable sources to be funding long-term solutions. So I certainly want to bring that up, because $7.4 million, that's a lot of work that went into getting that in 2024. So good job there.
Thank you. Yeah, both used and secured. So some of those dollars will serve us in the future, but the team is very thoughtful about finding additional resources. Often when we have those dollars to leverage, when we have your tax dollars entrusted to us, it is always my preference that we find a way to double that dollar, to triple that dollar in order to invest in our community.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. 7.4 million procured and used in 2024. That's an important distinction. We do have our first online question. And so, Brian, I think this is appropriate for you. Explain the specific ownership tax. Is that a Parks and Rec? I am unfamiliar with that. Where does it come from and what is it used for? But a special ownership tax. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Oh, okay. All right.
It has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight, but it's a good question. It's a good question from the CPA exam. This has taken me back.
Oh, okay. So, but
Years,
it's not. It doesn't apply to Parks and
Well,
does it apply?
Specific ownership tax would be the component of property tax that is applied to furniture, fixtures, and equipment in a business concern. So if you're running a business in your home, for example, you may have to pay specific ownership tax on your desk and your office equipment in your house. So it's a pretty esoteric piece of property tax. It contributes, I don't know off top of my head exactly what percentage of our property tax revenue comes from specific ownership tax, but I want to say a few things about it. One, yeah, it's kind of one of the nuanced pieces of property tax, and I see my audience here is a little bit confused. Probably some of you at home has zero to talk about what we're to do with what we're talking about tonight.
Okay.
But it's a great question. Good question.
Yeah, each one of these, we learn something new, so thank you
That
very
is just
much.
put that one in your pocket, and
Yeah.
now you've got it. Now you know what specific ownership tax is.
Okay.
But no, it doesn't really have anything to do with our budget cuts or
Parks and Rec.
or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question though.
All right.
Good question.
No, thank you. Thank you for asking that. We really appreciate the questions and all good questions because they're things to think about and
Sure.
learn through. Do we have anybody else in person who's got a question right now? Okay, we do have another question for our online attendees. How long until the deferred park maintenance becomes insurmountable with the current funding levels? Asked another way, at what point are the amenities closed or removed and not replaced? Like at what point are we removing amenities?
Sure. So this does not happen all at once. This happens over a length of time. Every one of our assets has a usable life. Playground assets are often 10 to 12 years of life. A newly poured post-tension concrete slab for a tennis court might have 30, 40 years of life. So what we're going to be paying attention to is we're going to try and preserve as much life out of each of the assets that we have in order to benefit our community to the best ability that we can. But as assets reach the end of their usable life, we don't want to wait until they are unsafe. We want to be thoughtful. All of our playgrounds are regularly inspected by a playground safety inspector. So it will not, the question was how long would it take? This will not happen overnight, but there will be incremental impacts each year as certain assets that we have reach the end of their usable life.
And I believe our FAQ even had addressed Edmondson Park tennis courts, the closure there. So the PDF that we did with frequently asked questions, there were some questions related, and Edmondson was on there. That was a tennis court that was removed this year. So we are seeing impacts of that. We have another online question. How much money, this one we might not have at the tip of our tongue, how much money does pickleball court reservations bring? And, before we answer that, Kara, I noticed when we were preparing for this event today that you had 1,400 shelter reservations in 2024. It was, a little bit, was it?
16,000 reservations.
Oh, that's huge.
Shelters, sports, thank you. No, let me expand that. We have 16,000 reservations made for our shelters, sports fields, tennis, and pickleball courts.
Oh, I was just talking about shelters in general, but that is even more impressive. So thank you very much. So this question kind of relates. How much money does pickleball court reservations bring? Do you have that at the tip of your tongue, or is that something that?
I don't. I would much prefer that we get back to this individual with the actuals. Because we don't have our actual budgets in front of us today or our actuals.
Sure.
That would
Okay.
be my preference.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask this person, make sure that we have your email address so that we can get back to you with that answer, because we certainly do want to look that up. We've got 10 minutes left in person. Are there any folks in person who have any questions? I know it helps when we answer some of these in the PDF as well, because a lot of times what we've seen is people are coming in with a lot of questions and then they see it on the PDF and they get it answered. So we have seen that be very useful in the past. Let's see, we have another one. Okay, funding with the Thompson Pocket Park. What funding did the city manager reallocate for the Thompson Pocket Park?
This is really an opportunity for us. So the Thompson Pocket Park, located at 4th and Lincoln, was a site built in the 80s before our community downtown expanded. Since that park was built, and it was really just built as a leisure space, maybe a pretty nice place to go to, our population downtown has exploded. There's over 400 new units downtown that weren't there before. And this park has become underutilized and in some cases unutilized. It's not perceived as a safe space. We want to make sure that we are using the opportunity of the Hip Streets program, the Hip Streets project, to jump on this opportunity to make those improvements that will be immediately adjacent to the Hip Streets development. Because this project is so tied to new growth in our community, especially the new growth of downtown, we are looking at the capital expansion fees in order to fund the redesign and the redevelopment of this space.
And if I may, that when we talked about our fund balance and we talked about the general fund sliver and we saw the big red portion of the pie, that's where the funding for that pocket park is coming from. It's coming from the red portion because, as Kara just explained, it's coming from our capital expansion fees, which are a great asset to the city. The challenge with those fees is, okay, you can use them to meet the needs of expanding population like we are here. We have basically a space that isn't being used for anything right now, so we're going to create a safe public space there. But the challenge with CEF's capital expansion fees is if we use them, someone has to maintain them. Now, this is a relatively small park that will probably have a relatively small operations and maintenance component to it. But again, remember we talked about our tax revenue situation. We have these capital expansion fees, but our challenge is where can we find places to use them effectively that doesn't require a lot of maintenance. So this was a perfect example of how we are able to put them to work, but it's pretty small.
And we still have time left, and we've got one in person. So in terms of parks and recreation, you mentioned golf as the only enterprise fund. How do you use fees from Chilson Center, and how do those fees from the Chilson Center factor in and differ from the golf fund?
You say it was how do we use the fees?
So,
how do we? Sure.
So for the people online, I want to make sure that this. So where do the use fees for the Chilson Center go?
Sure. So all of that contributes back to our requirement to hit a 65% cost recovery. So the general fund portion that funds our recreation division is allocated January 1, and we've planned for the full amount. They allocate the full amount that we get for the year on January 1 at the start of the fiscal year. Throughout that fiscal year, we are required to generate and get to that 65% cost recovery. I'm pleased to say that we often perform ahead of that, which is great because those are additional resources back into the general fund. But when we talk about our fees for the Chilson Center, we operate on a cost recovery philosophy that looks for the greatest subsidization in the community benefit, the programs and the access that serves a community benefit. And we have a higher rate of cost recovery when it's an individual benefit. So there's a continuum of where we place different programs that we have. For example, a swim lesson program might be on a highly subsidized, a community event might be highly subsidized, but a pottery class might not be. So all of the fees that are generated, we do not take those in, use those to pay a bill the next month. Those are returned into the general fund throughout the year. Thank you.
And if I may, it's kind of an accounting question, so I want to jump in there if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. There's a real separation between how those fees are handled. Like in the golf fund, when you pay your greens fee or anything, the pro shop or wherever, it stays in the golf fund. And that money really kind of goes into their account in perpetuity. It's like a business. And as Kara's explained earlier, when we talk about fees going into the general fund, it's a little different. It's not kept by the Chilson Center and then carried over into the future year because those services, those programs are subsidized by sales tax. And it's the general fund, right? It kind of goes into a general bucket where then we see what resources we have, going forward. So it's very important we set those cost recovery percentages. And I will say 65% is a phenomenal cost recovery ratio. It's a very Loveland thing. I mean, everything we do here, like you've seen, we're doing it at the lowest price and we're providing all the services. This is a very well-run rec center that's able to really sustain itself very well and kind of help out the rest of the general fund. So they're really very different. One's a business, it keeps its money, but it operates off of fees. The other is a tax-subsidized service to the community and is part of a bigger conversation in the general fund.
So we have another in-person question. And while we're grabbing that in-person question, I want to point out, for those of you who are attending online and you don't know a whole lot about the services and facilities of our Parks and Recreation Department, if you go to lovegov.org/parks recreation, you'll be able to access our activity guide. You'll be able to see and link to our golf courses, our aquatic facilities, our trail information, all of the parks and the park amenities that we have. But again, that's lovegov.org/parks recreation, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the services of that great department. Okay, so how much money does the Sparkler softball tournament generate for the city? We're going to start there. It's a two-part question, so let's start there.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, the good news is, as we continue into the future, different technology tools, AI tools, are going to allow us to really hone in on and pinpoint the actual dollar amount that we are generating for the community. We know that this is a very popular event for our community. Our economic development team, our hoteliers know that they are going to be sold out. We have data that shows that we have like 80,000 people. We have data that shows the different places that these individuals are visiting. And it hasn't necessarily been supported by the Placer AI is the name of the technology that is now being utilized. But for many years, we have roughly said, and I think our economic development team has said, roughly $3 million in economic impact. And I can't wait to actually zero in with the technology to truly define that economic impact for our community.
And for those who don't know what the Sparkler tournament is, can you define what that is?
Sure, I'm going to do a fairly poor job of it, but it is one of the largest softball tournaments in the country. It is really embraced by the state of Colorado. We are a focal point of that tournament, and we bring in people from across the country.
Okay, so the second part of this question is, will Barnes and Centennial continue to be maintained and expanded or upgraded to keep the tournament? Barnes and Centennial, will they continue to be maintained and expanded and upgraded to be able to keep the tournament?
Well, I think it's definitely fair to say that we're looking into that. There are some opportunities. Some of our peers in other communities have gone to artificial turf, where we have grass turf and skinned infields with just the dirt. So I think it's definitely a project that we are looking into. Was the question when or how or how?
No, it was, can we look future forward to it continuing to be maintained? Is that a question that we have evaluated yet, whether or not it is going to continue to be maintained, expanded, upgraded, or is that yet to be seen?
We are definitely evaluating that. And when we start talking about those types of improvements that you're talking about, what we talk about is an expansion of service. We talk about an expansion of time that tournaments can be played. This year we had a full tournament booked with teams from across the country, hotels booked, and we had to cancel because our fields were too wet. So we definitely want to explore all opportunities to extend the service of that asset, to increase the number of days that can be playable on those surfaces, and continue to support the goals of economic development in our community.
Okay. Are there any other in-person questions or online questions at this time? We're coming to the end of this event, and so I want to make a final call for questions if you've got any. If you're in person, if you just raise your hand, we'll come grab it. Online, again, we've got one more minute, but we really appreciate everyone who has taken the time tonight to attend this event. Like I said earlier in this event, we will post the video so that it can be shared on Friday by noon, and we will do that on lovegov.org/TV. We put it on our letstalkloveland.org/budget page, and we just try and get that out as best as possible. So again, we know that the weather was terrible tonight. There were all of those alerts about the high wind and red flag warnings, and so thank you guys so much for attending with us. And with that, this is the conclusion of the event. We really appreciate your time. Thanks, and have a great day.